You're just a nobody on these streets. Nobody's going to care what happens to you. The words, whispered by Officer Marcus Bradley to his partner, hung in the warm afternoon air as they approached 9-year-old Nicole Anderson outside Miller's corner store. He had no inkling that in less than an hour that sentiment would return to him, a specter of his own making, poised to shatter his world. Bradley looked at the child on the curb, a brilliant little girl waiting for her grandmother, a bag of candy for her school fundraiser beside her, and saw only what he was conditioned to see. Another statistic. Another face to intimidate without consequence. Another soul he believed the system was built to ignore. He was about to discover the magnitude of his error. As Nicole sat on that curb, meticulously counting her allowance money, she was blissfully unaware that her mother was seated in a classified meeting at the highest echelon of the federal government. She didn't know that her mom was one of the most formidable figures in the entire justice system, and Officer Bradley, a man teetering on the edge of his own ruin, was about to make a decision that would unravel his life completely. The call had come from the store owner, a Mr. Peterson, who claimed a suspicious child was acting strangely. The reality was far more innocent. Nicole had simply been inquisitive, asking detailed questions about baking ingredients with the bright, curious mind of a gifted 9-year-old. But to Mr. Peterson, a black child asking questions registered as a threat. Bradley approached with his customary aggression, his voice sharp as he demanded to know what she was doing. The little girl, who had never so much as earned a detention, politely explained about the bake sale, even presenting her receipt. But Bradley's mind was a fortress against reason. How could a child like her in a neighborhood like this have $12? A small crowd began to gather. Phones emerged, their small red lights blinking to life. It was then, under the unblinking gaze of a dozen tiny lenses, that Bradley made the choice that would change everything. Because Nicole's mother wasn't just any concerned parent who would call the police chief and demand an apology. Officer Bradley thought he was dealing with a powerless child from a forgotten family. He was wrong. Dead wrong. And when Nicole's mother learned what had been done to her little girl, she would unleash every ounce of her considerable power to ensure it never happened to another child again. To understand the weight of what was about to happen, you must first understand who Nicole Anderson was. This was not just any 9-year-old. She was a prodigy who read at a high school level, devouring science textbooks the way other kids read comics. She lived with her grandmother Ruth in a cozy house on Maple Street, while her mother's work demanded constant travel. The kind of travel that involved security details and classified itineraries. But what truly defined Nicole wasn't her intellect, it was her heart. She saw the world with a pure, trusting innocence, believing all adults were good and that police officers were heroes. That innocence was about to be irrevocably shattered. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon. Nicole had been saving her allowance for weeks, every quarter and dollar carefully set aside until she had $12 to buy candy for her school's fundraiser. Picture her, practically bouncing with excitement in Miller's corner store, not just grabbing sweets but asking the clerk about ingredients. "Does this chocolate have nuts? My friend Sarah can't have peanuts." To the elderly store owner, Mr. Peterson, her questions were not endearing. They were suspect. In his mind, something didn't add up. Across town, Officer Marcus Bradley was living through the worst month of his life. An 8-year veteran of the force, he was drowning. His divorce was final, his child support payments were late, and his drinking was a secret he was failing to keep. His personnel file was thick with complaints from minority neighborhoods, where his aggressive tactics had repeatedly crossed the line. Bradley was a powder keg, and Mr. Peterson's call was the spark. His partner, Officer Jenny Chen, was his opposite. 6 months out of the academy, she still believed in the shield she wore. But she was a rookie, still on probation, and terrified of senior officers like Bradley. She'd seen him bend the rules, watched him use fear as a tool, and every time she considered reporting him, the threat of losing her job silenced her. As their patrol car pulled up, Nicole was sitting peacefully on the curb, her grandmother having gone to bring the car around. Her candy was arranged in neat piles, her change counted and recounted. To any rational observer, she was the picture of childhood joy. But Bradley didn't see a child. He saw a problem to be handled with force. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he barked, his voice already raised. "Where did you get that money?" Nicole looked up, her trust in the uniform unwavering. She politely explained, holding up her receipt, expecting a smile, perhaps a word of encouragement. Instead of seeing innocence, Bradley saw defiance. Instead of hearing an explanation, he heard a lie. Officer Chen watched from the car, a sick feeling coiling in her stomach. She recognized the look in Bradley's eyes. It never ended well. None of them knew that this moment was not unfolding in a vacuum. Far away, in Washington, D.C., Nicole's mother was concluding the most important meeting of her career. And when she learned what was happening to her daughter, the entire system of justice would feel her wrath. Bradley stared down at the receipt, at the carefully organized coins, at the school flyer Nicole had proudly shown him. A reasonable person would have seen the truth. But reason had long ago abandoned Marcus Bradley. "I don't believe you," he snarled, his voice rising. "Where did you really get this money? Did you steal it? Empty your pockets. Now." Nicole's eyes widened with fear. The accusation was a blow, a violation of everything her grandmother had taught her about honesty. With trembling hands, she turned her pockets inside out, revealing a house key on a unicorn keychain, some lint, and a crumpled tissue. "See?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't steal anything. I saved for 3 weeks. My grandma can tell you. Why don't you believe me?" The questions, so innocent and heartbreaking, should have disarmed him. But to Bradley, they sounded like a challenge to his authority. He didn't realize that others were watching. Mrs. Williams, who had seen Nicole and her grandmother shopping earlier, stepped forward. "Excuse me, officer," she said. "I saw this little girl with her grandmother. She was perfectly well behaved." Bradley spun on her. "Ma'am, step back. This is police business." More people drew closer. Mr. Johnson, who had seen the family at the store for months. Mrs. Davis, a third-grade teacher from the local elementary. With each person who spoke up for Nicole, Bradley's anger intensified. He could feel control slipping away, and it terrified him. "Everyone step back right now," he shouted, his hand drifting toward his sidearm. That's when the phones came out, a constellation of recording devices aimed at him. Officer Chen finally got out of the car, her instincts screaming. "Marcus," she said quietly, "maybe we should just—" "Stay back, Chen," he snapped. "I've got this." But he had nothing. Nicole was crying now, soft sobs of confusion. "Can I please call my grandma?" she asked through her tears. "She just went to get the car." It was a simple, desperate plea from a frightened child. Instead of granting it, Bradley saw it as the final insult. "You're not calling anyone," he roared, his face crimson. "You're gonna sit there and stop lying to me." The crowd gasped. It was then that Bradley completely lost control. The slap echoed across the parking lot like a gunshot. The sound was so sharp, so vicious, that for a moment an absolute silence fell. A grown man, a police officer, had just struck a 9-year-old child across the face. Nicole tumbled backward off the curb, candy scattering across the asphalt. The cry that tore from her throat was a sound of pure terror and shattered trust. "I want my mommy," she sobbed, holding her cheek. "Why did you hurt me?" The crowd erupted. Mrs. Williams was shouting into her phone, "I got it all on video!" Just then, Grandmother Ruth came running around the corner. Seeing her granddaughter on the ground, a primal fury ignited within her. "What did you do to my baby?" she screamed, running to Nicole's side. The scene descended into chaos. Officer Chen finally found her voice. "Marcus, she's just a child. What have you done?" Bradley, still caught in his rage, tried to justify the unjustifiable. "She was resisting. I felt threatened." "Threatened?" Mrs. Williams yelled back. "By a 9-year-old girl buying candy?" Within an hour, the video was everywhere. The hashtag Justice for Nicole was trending. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., a phone was about to ring, signaling the end of Marcus Bradley's career. Captain Sarah Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of the department, had seen her share of excessive force cases. But as she sat at her desk that evening and pressed play on Bradley's body cam footage, nothing could have prepared her. The video was damningly clear. The peaceful child, the aggressive officer, the polite compliance, and then the slap. There was no resistance. There was no threat. There was only a scared little girl asking for her grandmother. Rodriguez watched it 3 times, her disbelief turning to cold fury. 30 minutes later, Marcus Bradley was suspended without pay. "This is beyond unacceptable," she told her lieutenant. "He hit a child. There's no coming back from this." Back on Maple Street, Ruth gently cleaned Nicole's bruised cheek while the little girl asked the same questions over and over. Why did he hurt me, Grandma? Am I a bad person? How do you explain racism to a 9-year-old? How do you restore a child's faith in a world that has just shown her its ugliest face? You did nothing wrong, baby, Ruth whispered, holding her close. That man was wrong. So wrong. Nicole couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. By Sunday morning, the story had exploded. Peaceful protests formed outside the police station. The video had millions of views, a tidal wave of outrage sweeping across the country. And while the community rallied around Nicole, Officer Marcus Bradley discovered that even his most loyal supporters could not defend the indefensible. His ex-wife, Lisa, had just seen the video on Facebook. When Bradley called that Sunday morning, stammering excuses into the phone, she cut him off before he could finish a single sentence. You hit a child, Marcus. A 9-year-old girl. Don't you dare call this house again. Don't even think about seeing our kids until you get the help you so clearly need. The police union representative, a man who had defended Bradley through multiple excessive force complaints, took one look at the body cam footage and slowly shook his head. I'm sorry, Marcus. I can't help you this time. Nobody can. Bradley spent the rest of that Sunday drinking in his quiet apartment, the television glowing with news coverage of his own downfall. He tried to piece together how his life had unraveled so quickly. He kept repeating the justifications in his head. I felt threatened. The kid was disrespectful. I was just doing my job. But deep down, in the part of his soul he fought to keep buried, he knew the truth. He'd lost control. He had let his anger, his prejudice, his pathetic need for power turn him into the kind of monster who hurts children. And now, the whole world knew exactly who Marcus Bradley really was. What Bradley didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that Nicole Anderson wasn't just any little girl whose story would trend for a week and then be forgotten. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful people in the American justice system. And when that woman found out what had been done to her baby girl, she was going to use every ounce of that power to make Marcus Bradley face the full and devastating consequences of his actions. A phone was about to ring in Washington, D.C., and everything was about to change. For 6 agonizing hours, Grandmother Ruth had been trying to reach Nicole's mother. 6 hours of busy signals, unanswered voicemails, and the cold, automated response. The person you are trying to reach is currently unavailable. 6 hours of watching her granddaughter flinch every time a car drove past the house. 6 hours of seeing the beautiful little girl jump at every sudden sound. 6 hours of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. Ruth knew Angela's work was important enough to keep her traveling constantly, important enough that she was sometimes unreachable for days at a time. But this was different. This was an emergency. Her baby had been hurt. She needed her mother. What Ruth couldn't know was that Angela Anderson was locked in the most classified meeting of her career. No phones allowed, no interruptions permitted, no contact with the outside world for any reason. It was the kind of meeting where even emergency calls had to wait. But finally, as the sun set on the worst day of Nicole's young life, Ruth's phone connected. Mom? Angela's voice came through, tired but laced with a familiar warmth. I'm so sorry I missed your calls. This meeting ran way longer than expected. How's my baby girl? Did you two have a good day shopping? Ruth's voice broke on the first word. Angela, sweetheart, you need to come home. Right now. Something terrible has happened. There was a dead pause on the other end of the line. Angela heard something in her mother's tone she had never heard before, a terrifying mix of rage and desperation that made her blood run cold. Mom, what is it? Is Nicole okay? Is she hurt? A police officer. He hurt our baby, Ruth whispered, her voice trembling. Angela, he put his hands on her. He hit her in the face. Our little Nicole. The silence that followed was deafening. In her career, Angela Anderson had prosecuted thousands of cases. She had seen the absolute worst of humanity, faced down the most violent criminals, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for those words. When Angela finally spoke, the tired mother was gone. In her place was something else entirely, something cold, sharp, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the voice of a woman with immense power and absolutely no intention of showing mercy. "What did you just say to me?" The words were so quiet, so controlled, they frightened Ruth more than a scream ever could. "A police officer." He slapped Nicole across the face at Miller's corner store. She was just sitting there with her candy, waiting for me to bring the car around, and he, Ruth choked, unable to finish. "I'm coming home," Angela said, her voice like steel. In the background, Ruth could hear sudden, urgent movement, chairs scraping, voices being summoned. "Don't let anyone else talk to Nicole until I get there. Do not let her out of your sight." There was a brief pause. "And Mom, make sure someone is recording everything from now on. Everything." What happened next would have seemed impossible to anyone watching. Within minutes of that call, one of the most secure federal buildings in Washington, D.C. erupted into a storm of controlled chaos. High-level meetings, months in the planning, were instantly canceled. Department heads who hadn't moved faster than a brisk walk in years were now sprinting through corridors. Security details that planned operations weeks in advance were mobilized with less than an hour's notice. Secret Service agents made urgent calls while FBI directors were briefed on a situation they didn't yet fully understand. Federal prosecutors were pulled from their Sunday evenings and ordered to report for duty immediately. And deep in the VIP parking garage, a convoy of black SUVs was being prepared for immediate departure, the kind of convoy that accompanied foreign presidents, the kind of security detail that shut down entire city blocks. But this wasn't for a dignitary. This was for one very angry mother who was about to remind the world what happens when you hurt the wrong person's child. The drive from Washington to Nicole's hometown normally took 3 hours. Angela Anderson made it in 90 minutes, her convoy flanked by a police escort that cleared traffic as federal agents coordinated a route free of any delay. As the black SUVs turned onto Maple Street, neighbors drifted out of their houses. This was a quiet, middle-class neighborhood where the annual block party was the height of excitement. No one had ever seen a government presence like this. Mrs. Henderson stood on her porch, her mouth agape. Mr. Garcia next door began recording on his phone, assuming some national emergency was unfolding. The Johnson family gathered at their front window, mesmerized and confused. When the lead SUV pulled into Ruth's driveway, the entire street fell silent. Federal agents in dark suits emerged first, scanning the area, speaking quietly into their earpieces, and establishing a secure perimeter. More agents followed, transforming the quiet suburban home into the site of a major federal operation. Then Angela Anderson stepped out of the middle vehicle. Even from a distance, it was obvious this woman was someone important. She moved with an authority that came from years of wielding real power. She was impeccably dressed, yet she was flanked by enough federal agents to protect a senator. But the most striking thing about her was not the power or the security. It was the look on her face, a controlled fury infinitely more terrifying than any scream. Ruth ran from the house. "Oh, thank God you're here," she sobbed, throwing her arms around Angela. "She's inside. She's been asking for you all day." Angela hugged her mother briefly, her eyes already fixed on the house. She walked inside like a woman on a mission, and what she saw in Nicole's bedroom made her hands shake with a rage she could barely contain. Her daughter was sitting on the bed, still in the clothes from her shopping trip, a deep, ugly bruise covering half of her small face. Nicole looked so fragile, so broken, that Angela had to grip the doorframe to steady herself. "Mommy?" Nicole's voice was a tiny, uncertain whisper. "I'm here, baby," Angela said, crossing the room in 3 strides and gathering her daughter into her arms. "Mommy's here now." Nicole buried her face in her mother's shoulder and began to cry. Deep, relieved sobs that come only when you finally feel safe. "He scared me, Mommy. The policeman was so mean. He said I was lying, but I wasn't. I bought the candy with my own money, I promise." Angela held her daughter close, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the bruise while her own hands trembled with fury. This wasn't just a slap. This was evidence of a crime. "I know you weren't lying, sweetheart," she said, her voice deadly calm. "You are the most honest little girl in the world, and that man was very, very wrong to hurt you." Nicole looked up, her big, trusting eyes still shadowed with fear. "Are you going to make sure he can't hurt any other kids, Mommy?" Angela's jaw clenched. When she spoke, it was barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of an unbreakable vow. "Oh yes, someone is going to pay for this, baby. Someone is going to pay for every tear you've cried and every nightmare you're going to have. Mommy promises you that. While Angela comforted her daughter, her agents were already at work. Phone calls were being made. Files were being pulled. A machine that could destroy careers and end lives was quietly being set into motion. By Monday morning, FBI agents were walking through the doors of the police station where Marcus Bradley worked. This was not a courtesy visit. It was a full federal investigation into civil rights violations, and everyone in the building knew it. Captain Sarah Rodriguez was in her office, fielding calls from the media circus, when her private line rang. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and utterly terrifying. Captain Rodriguez, this is Director Williams from the FBI Civil Rights Division. We need to speak with you immediately regarding the incident involving Officer Marcus Bradley and Nicole Anderson. The captain's face went pale. The FBI Civil Rights Division. This was no longer about excessive force. This was about federal crimes that sent police officers to prison for decades. Yes, ma'am, she managed. We will cooperate fully. I'm glad to hear that. We'll be there within the hour. And Captain, this investigation has the personal attention of some very high-ranking officials. I trust that means we will have your complete cooperation. When Rodriguez hung up, she immediately called the mayor, the police chief, and the city attorney. Within minutes, the entire city government knew the federal government was taking over the Bradley case. What none of them understood was why. Meanwhile, Marcus Bradley was in his apartment, nursing his third beer of the morning. The union rep had called an hour earlier with news that made his blood run cold. Marcus, this is bigger than we thought. The FBI is involved. They're calling it a federal civil rights investigation. I've never seen anything like this for a single incident. Bradley's hands shook. The FBI? For what? It was just a slap. Just a slap? The rep echoed, incredulous. Marcus, you struck a 9-year-old child on camera. Now the feds are treating this like a national security threat. Who is this kid's family? Do you have any idea? That was the question that had been haunting Bradley. Who was Nicole Anderson? Why had a simple incident at a corner store turned into a federal case? I don't know, he whispered. She's just some kid from the neighborhood. Lives with her grandmother. Well, you better figure it out fast, the union rep said, his voice grim. Because somebody with serious power is very, very angry about what you did to that little girl. And Marcus, I don't think anyone can help you now. As Bradley hung up, he had no idea that the most powerful woman in the American justice system was sitting in a house just 10 miles away, holding her traumatized daughter and planning his complete and total destruction. The moment of truth had arrived. For 3 days, the city, the media, and a bewildered police department had all been asking the same question. Who was Nicole Anderson? The answer was about to detonate Marcus Bradley's world. Angela Anderson was not just an angry mother. She was the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, the second highest ranking official in the Department of Justice. She was the woman personally appointed by the president to prosecute police misconduct across the country. The very person whose daughter Bradley had assaulted was, quite literally, the most powerful prosecutor in America when it came to sending corrupt cops to prison. He had, in a single stupid act of violence, picked a fight with his worst possible enemy. Within hours, the full power of the federal government descended upon his case. FBI agents weren't just investigating the slap, they were dissecting his entire 8-year career. What they found was exactly what Angela had expected. Bradley wasn't a good cop who made one mistake. He was a serial abuser who had been targeting minorities for years. They pulled every complaint ever filed against him. The Hispanic teenager thrown to the ground for looking suspicious. The domestic violence victim arrested for being mouthy. The black students he'd pepper sprayed during a peaceful protest. Case after case revealed a documented pattern of racism and excessive force. But this time was different. Victims who had been too scared to speak up before were now finding their courage. When word spread that the Deputy Attorney General herself was prosecuting, people came forward. Maria Rodriguez, whose son Bradley had brutalized 3 years earlier. I was too afraid. He threatened us with deportation. James Washington, an Iraq veteran beaten during a traffic stop. I filed a complaint, but they buried it. Maybe now someone will finally care. The most crucial witness, however, was his own partner, Officer Jenny Chen. For months, she had watched Bradley's behavior escalate, watched him lie on reports and target innocent people. She had stayed silent, terrified for her career. But seeing him strike a child had broken her silence. "I should have spoken up before this happened," she sobbed to federal investigators. "I watched him do terrible things and I did nothing." Her testimony was devastating, providing dates, times, and corroborating details for a dozen other incidents. The story exploded nationwide. Deputy Attorney General's daughter assaulted by cop dominated the headlines. Congressional hearings were called. The hashtag justice for Nicole trended worldwide. A 9-year-old girl who just wanted to buy candy had become the face of police brutality in America. Bradley's world collapsed. FBI agents arrested him on federal civil rights charges that carried decades in prison. The union abandoned him. His ex-wife filed a restraining order. When his lawyer finally explained who Nicole's mother was, Bradley stared in disbelief. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She's just some kid." "No, Marcus," his lawyer replied flatly. "She's the daughter of the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, and you hit her on camera." In the end, the case against him was airtight. Body cam footage, dozens of witnesses, Officer Chen's testimony, and a growing list of past victims. When Bradley finally faced the prosecutors, he was a broken man. The swaggering cop was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. "Mr. Bradley," the lead prosecutor said, his voice cold and even, "this folder contains evidence of federal crimes spanning your entire career." He turned a small monitor on the table to face Bradley. On the screen, the body cam footage began to play. His own hand swinging forward, the sharp crack of the impact, the little girl falling backward, crying out for her mommy. "Before you utter another word," the lawyer said, his voice low and steady, "I need you to understand precisely who Nicole Anderson is. Her mother is Deputy Attorney General Angela Anderson. As head of the Civil Rights Division, she is the woman who prosecutes cases exactly like yours." The color drained from Bradley's face. He began to crumble, his denials devolving into desperate, choked sobs. "I didn't know who she was. I swear I didn't know." And as if summoned by his denial, the door opened. Angela Anderson herself stepped into the room. She stood in absolute silence, her gaze fixed on the man who had harmed her daughter. When she finally spoke, her voice was a blade of ice. "Mr. Bradley," she began, "you struck my 9-year-old daughter across the face, a child who was peacefully waiting for her grandmother after buying candy for a school fundraiser." Bradley couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. "You keep repeating that you didn't know who she was, as if that is some kind of defense. You shouldn't need to know a child's name to understand that striking them is an unforgivable act. You shouldn't need to know their mother is a federal prosecutor to afford them basic human dignity." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "For 8 years I have prosecuted officers just like you. Officers who believe a badge grants them the right to brutalize the innocent, who target minorities because they believe no one will care." Angela stood to leave, pausing at the door for one final, devastating statement. "You made this personal when you put your hands on my child. But justice isn't personal, Mr. Bradley. Justice is blind. And justice is precisely what you are about to receive." As Angela turned and walked out, a cold, crushing reality settled over Bradley. His career was not just over, it was annihilated. His freedom was a memory. The police union, which had once promised unwavering support, now offered only silence. His ex-wife barred him from seeing his children. The friends who had once shared his patrol car no longer answered his calls. Marcus Bradley had become the very thing Angela Anderson had always warned corrupt officers they would become. A cautionary tale, a stark reminder that when you harm an innocent child, no one is above the law. The confrontation was over. The reckoning had begun. Justice for Marcus Bradley was not a slow-moving process. It was a deluge. Within a week, he was terminated from the police force, fired with cause. His badge was taken, his gun confiscated, his name stripped from every roster. But that was only the beginning. Federal prosecutors descended with charges of civil rights violations, a crime carrying a mandatory minimum of 5 years in prison. Simultaneously, state prosecutors filed assault charges for striking a minor. The Anderson family's civil suit landed the same week, seeking damages not only for the physical wound, but for the invisible scars of emotional trauma. Bradley lost everything. His pension vanished. His health benefits were stripped away. His credentials were permanently revoked, ensuring he could never work in law enforcement again. The man who had abused his authority for 8 years was left with nothing but crippling legal bills and the cold certainty of a prison cell. But for Angela Anderson, destroying one corrupt officer was not enough. She was determined to ensure that what happened to Nicole would never happen to another child. From her position as Deputy Attorney General, she spearheaded the most sweeping police reform legislation the nation had ever seen. At its heart was a provision that came to be known as Nicole's Law. Mandatory de-escalation training focused specifically on interactions with children. The law required every officer in America to complete specialized training. It established new protocols that made using force against a child almost impossible without exhaustive review. It created civilian oversight boards with real investigative power and tied federal funding to compliance. For police departments across the country, reform was no longer optional. It was a matter of survival. Officer Jenny Chen, whose testimony had been crucial, became one of the reform's most potent advocates. Transferred to the Community Relations Division, she traveled to academies across the country, her story a stark lesson on the cost of silence. "Your duty is not merely to follow orders," she would tell new recruits, her voice steady and certain. "It is to protect the innocent, even when that means standing against your own partner." Her presentations became mandatory viewing, a powerful reminder that moral courage is as vital as physical courage. But while the machinery of law and policy turned, the most profound healing was taking place in a quiet house on Maple Street where a 9-year-old girl was slowly learning to trust the world again. Nicole's recovery was agonizing. The nightmares were relentless. She was afraid to leave the house, terrified of another encounter with police. So Angela made the most critical decision of her career. She took an extended leave from the Department of Justice, setting aside her national duties to focus solely on her daughter's recovery. The second most powerful legal mind in the country put everything on hold to help one little girl feel safe again. In therapy, Nicole asked the same heartbreaking questions. Why did he hurt me? What did I do wrong? Slowly, with her mother's unwavering love, she began to heal. She learned that Officer Bradley was a bad man who made a terrible choice, but not all officers were like him. She learned it was not her fault, and most importantly, she learned that her voice mattered. The incident galvanized her community. Parents, teachers, and police began meeting regularly, establishing youth programs to teach children their rights, and strengthening community policing initiatives to rebuild shattered trust. Nicole's school implemented a new civil rights curriculum that spread across the country, teaching children everywhere that they had a right to be safe. 6 months after the incident that had changed everything, Nicole Anderson stood on a stage in her community center, addressing a crowd of parents, teachers, and police officers. "I learned something important," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Even when people are mean, we should try to be kind. But I learned something even more important. Grown-ups should never, ever hurt children, no matter what." The room was silent, hanging on her every word. "Some people ask if I'm angry at the police officer who hurt me," she continued. "I was, and I was scared. But my mom taught me that being angry doesn't help. Working to make sure it doesn't happen to other kids, that's what helps." She looked directly at the officers in the front rows. "I know most of you are good people. Thank you for learning how to do better. Thank you for making sure no other little girl has to go through what I did." When she finished, the room erupted in a standing ovation. There were few dry eyes, even among the uniformed officers who had come to listen to a child they were now sworn to protect in a new way. In her closing words, Nicole delivered a message that resonated around the world. Sometimes the smallest voices create the biggest changes. Every child deserves to feel safe. The transformation was absolute. Marcus Bradley was in federal prison. Officer Jenny Chen was a national voice for reform. Police departments nationwide were being reshaped. But most importantly, a 9-year-old girl, knocked down by cruelty, had risen stronger than ever. The little girl who just wanted to buy candy had become the catalyst for the most significant police reform in American history. In doing so, she proved that the most powerful force for change can come in the smallest of packages, and that no one is too small to make a difference when they find the courage to stand for what is right.